Imagine Draupadi to be the human body. Imagine that a human body are married to the five senses. Every human body has five senses. Imagine the body to be married to the five senses who are the five Pandavas. Now imagine the 100 Kauravas to be the tendencies that the human body has. So your life is the battle between the senses and the tendencies, and the world that we live in is the Kurukshetra. Now think about it. When they think about it, it starts making sense to them.
What's the one key element most people underestimate about executive presence?
How would you feel about a man? A man who's a very virtuous, truthful man, but is a co-husband with his brothers. Okay, there is something that I really need to work on. I mean, I left it long time ago. Is I really want to go back to my singing, which had Lucky Ali, which had beautiful music, and I want to learn how to play the violin. I hope so. I will be one day. I think Balraj Sahni. I loved him.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, Do Biga Zameen.
Shant, peace, tranquility.
Buddha. I think Gautam Buddha, and over here Ranbir Kapoor. He's so dopey-eyed. I mean, like his face does emanate peace. Talking about so many demons, we're talking about Transformers for that matter. Yeah, Mahishasur, Mayavi, my Transformer. All those things. So usko to relate thoda sa karna padta hai. Just that is all that is needed.
Hi, I'm Surabhi Sapra. Welcome to my podcast, The Migrating Occult. There are some people whose lives read like novels, full of chapters that span art, leadership, resilience, and reinvention. Today, I have the honor of speaking with one such powerhouse, Miss Mona Verma. She is not just an award winning author of 9 books, but a haiku poet, a literary curator, a leadership coach, and a fierce advocate for women's voices in both boardrooms and bookshelves. An alumnus of Lady Shri Ram College and Harvard Business School, her work has found space in research theses, global journals, and even the prestigious British Routledge Encyclopedia. From being honored with the REX Karamveer Medal and Uttarakhand Ratna to shaping literary ecosystems across India, Ms. Mona Verma is proof that impact doesn't come from choosing one path, but walking many with purpose. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Surabhi, for having me here. It's a privilege and honor to be speaking with you.
The honor is all mine, ma'am. Thank you so much. Um, Ma'am, let's start with a little about your background.
Haridwar being a very small town, it does not provide you or render you with the kind of luxuries that children in bigger cities do have. So I grew up here basically on a very staple diet of books. We did not have a television in our house. So the only escape route that I had was the books, to get lost in them. And this kind of writing that we read during that time had a huge impact on me as a person, as a little girl in a small city who wanted to be like the protagonist that I was reading about. So, whether it was Alice in Wonderland and I didn't mind going down the rabbit hole, or whether it was Nancy Drew and I saw mystery in everything that there was, even if it was out there in the open sight. But yes, I wanted to be like all those children that I read about. And as I grew up, then came, Gone with the Wind, Little Women, and those books, Munshi Premchand and whatnot. And the adolescent in me wanted to be like the protagonist there, like all of them, the best of them, in fact. And I started writing stories, and the stories were replicas of the stories I had read. So it was out and out plagiarism in those years. I just changed the name of the characters. And then my grandfather one day asked me after seeing my report card. So he saw my report card where I had majorly flunked in mathematics. But my marks in English and Hindi in the languages were the best in the class. So he looked at my report card and he asked me, "Ye dekha hai?" So with whole lot of courage that I could call it, I told him, "हाँ मैं ही तो लाई हूँ स्कूल से." So he said, "अब जब इतने बेशर्म हो गए हो तो ये नंबर भी देखे हैं?" So I said, "हाँ जी." He said, "क्या बनोगे बड़े होकर?" So I said, "Writer." And he said, वो तो ठीक है, लेकिन बनोगे क्या? So I told him, Bauji, I said writer. He said, वो मैंने सुन लिया है, लेकिन बनना क्या है? I told him, yes, I will be a writer. So he sat me aside and said, सोच लिया writer बनना है? I said, हाँ जी. So he told me that, listen, there's a difference between eking out a livelihood and a hobby. So be mindful of that. Secondly, there are generations who will be reading what you are writing. Be mindful of that. And the third thing that he said, which I still remember, और वो मेरे जहन में आज तक भी गूंजती है, एंड ही सेड, लफ्ज़ों के भी जायके होते हैं, चक्कर परोसना चाहिए, याद रखना.
बहुत ही उम्दा, आई थिंक बहुत ही बढ़िया बात बोली है.
I launched my first book in 2008. It was called A Bridge to Nowhere. And my grandmom, because my grandparents brought me up, she really wanted to see that book, but she was on ventilator. And by the time this book was released by Ruskin Bond sir himself, a book that released after quite some time, Mama never lived to see that book. So that stays as a huge regret in my personal life, and a very emotional moment when I think about that book and her absence. Because the best thing made its presence in my life when the most important person was absent. And Ruskin Bond sir released that book, and when I asked him what did he think about the book, and he said, well, your best is yet to come, so keep writing. And I took that very, very seriously. And today I'm 9 books old. But COVID struck, and during COVID, there were various anthologies. I guess I contributed to about 7 to 8 anthologies during that time, including with my steady publisher, Readomania. Since I belong to the Himalayan belt, I was born here, brought up here, married here. So there are so many stories that go around, and stories that you hear from sometimes house help, sometimes a person coming from the hills, sometimes a migrant, sometimes your hairdresser who's from Pithoragar, right? And I thought that these stories are magnificent stories. Same on the lines of Harry Potter. And I mean, but why do these stories not have a taker? Where are we going wrong? These stories also need to be told. The backstories of Mahabharata and the Ramayana are there in our Puranas. So when you say that the Mahabharata was actually the battle between Kauravas and Pandavas, you talk to people, they say, what is Mahabharata? They just think of the battle between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. But actually, it was battle of the backstories of all those people. Why was Shikhandi there? Why was Bhishma Pitama unable to act? Why didn't Arjun want to fight? What is it that Krishna had to say? What about the 4 birds that Tarakshi left behind, 4 eggs? So all those are the backstories, and these backstories are present in our Puranas. Yes, because there's a completely different brain mapping over here. So we have a huge ground to cover between our scriptures, which are Shrutis and Smritis, to this generation, which is a logical questioning generation. Because when I see other people's writings, the way they talk, the way they explain, what they write, sometimes I feel like coming back home and drowning in a spoonful of water.
Okay, that brings me to your next question. You are also into corporate training, yeah. With this kind of attitude, how do you manage to?
Well, see, when we are doing corporate trainings, the first thing that we have to do is we have to relate to our audience. So when it comes to any training or telling people about a particular principle, supposedly the Pareto principle or an Eisenhower matrix, whatever, everything is out there on the internet. Everything is out there in the brilliant books people have written. Why would somebody want to listen to you? Why would a company be willing to pay you in thousands just to listen to something which they'll also, once they browse through the internet, they will find it there? The only difference is the human connection, how you explain something. I think sometimes, my entire career as a writer has helped me greatly because I'm able to explain things better. That means that I can explain things to people in a way, in a very tangible fashion, so that it becomes almost palpable for them, even if they haven't seen it, whether it's come to a particular principle. And I'm explaining Eisenhower matrix to them through the story of Hanuman. That is how I explain time management to corporate employees. And they catch on. एंड लक्ष्मण जी कैसे मूर्छित हुए, कैसे द्रोणागिरी पर्वत पर हनुमान जी गए, कैसे वैद्य सुशेषण के लिए वो संजीवनी बूटी लाए, वहाँ पे उनके दिमाग में क्या टाइम मैनेजमेंट स्किल चल रहा था, व्हाट ही थॉट ही कुड डेलीगेट, what he could pass off as useless effort, a futile effort, what was urgent for him and what was important for him, and how he managed. So, all that.
But this is amazing connection between, mythology and training.
And storytelling and gaining knowledge always goes hand in hand, in the sense that stories have a very relatable connection with people. So when you are telling a story very clearly, with a very cogent motive, and getting to the point, it works. So I think that's where I as a writer come in, and storytelling helps me.
See, most of your books are based on mythology, Indian mythology, and our mountains and folklore. Now, Indian mythology can sometimes get very complicated, or at least I feel so. They say that हर इंसान अपनी किस्मत लिखवा के आता है, right? Everything is predestined. सब लिखा हुआ है. And then the other school of thought says that, do unto others as you would want them to do to you. And here comes in karma. How do karma and kismat coexist?
Well, when we think about both karma and kismat, right? So these terminologies are man-made terminologies, right? And now there's nobody who writes your kismat. Nobody tells you all that. But then comes karma. So karma is something very subjective, something which is well within your ambit. You can change it. For example, supposedly there are two brothers and one has a physical impairment. So he cannot walk. He's bound to a wheelchair. Because he's bound to a wheelchair, there are many other ailments that have taken over. He's putting on weight, and then he looks at his brother who's very athletic, who runs every day, who plays tennis, and he says, Dekho, we are brothers. He talks about the cruel play of the kismat, where the positive one was assigned to the brother, and he was the one who was at the receiving end of the cursed part of it. And then comes karma. How I see it, this is a very personal viewpoint, how I see it, that karma is something which is well within your ambit, where you are ready to stand up and make a choice and do something about the way you are. Now, this person bound to the wheelchair, in case there is a possibility, he looks at people who participate in Paralympics. There are actors, there are dancers with the Jaipur foot. And then he feels that why not? Like, even I can do something about it. And this is how he changes the course of his life, by finding out what can be done to rectify his situation, get a Jaipur foot, be able to walk again, be able to do things instead of resigning to their fate. So now that is your karma. That is the way karma can challenge the kismat, if so called way. Like Nike also says, just do it. That is what karma tells you, just do it. Just do state karma. They talk about reincarnation, they talk about past births, they talk about the future births as well. And they talk about the cycle of karma and the continuum of life and death, right? I've written about that extensively in my book, Lost and Found in Banaras.
For the understanding of our audience, what is the difference between a haiku, limericks, and tanka?
I came across this poem by Ernest Hemingway, which said, "For sale, baby shoes never worn." Okay. And we were told in our class to derive whatever meaning that we wanted from this. So there are people who said that the child outgrew the shoes, this, that, and I came up with maybe the baby never worn. So I came up with maybe the child died during birth, right? Okay. So this is what Ernest Hemingway wants to say, right? And then this took me to discovering haiku. So haiku is a three-line poetry, has its origin in Japan, was first written by a poet called Basho. Going back to it, so Basho went to a battlefield, and from whatever he saw over there, he was so anguished that he wrote three lines and he couldn't go beyond. But those three lines were so powerful because he said, in the battlefield, all that remains of a soldier's dreams. And when you think about those lines, you suddenly feel that when you go to a battlefield, nothing remains. The bodies are gone, the grass has grown, and yet what remains over there is nothing but a soldier's unmet, unachieved dream. And I found this very fascinating medium where I could express whatever that I wanted in 3 words. But then there is a catch here, that there's a syllable count. And the syllable count is a 5-7-5 syllable count. The first line must not exceed 5 syllables, the second 7, and the last one again 5. But there is no rhyme, there's no rhyming, no rhythm. So limericks were basically, just nonsensical poetry, the kinds, the nursery rhymes, hickory dickory dock. So that again, this one has a rhythm, but the rhythm is very specific rhythm. It is A, A, B, B, A. So the first and the second line must rhyme with the fifth line. And the third line must rhyme with the fourth line. So hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock, are rhyming. The clock struck 1 and the mouse came down, again rhyme. Hickory dickory dock, now again it rhymes with the first and the second line. And this A, B, B, A kind of rhythm also has a syllable count. This is 7 to 9 in the first and the second line, 7 to 9 syllables. The third and the fourth are 5 to 7, 5 to 7 syllables. And the last one again, 7 to 9 syllables that there is. So they're nonsensical, but they have a rhythm and they're interesting. So they were basically started by Edward Lear in Ireland. And his first book of poetry was called Nonsensical Poetry. And the second one was more nonsense when he wrote, because they became very popular with people and they loved it. Now coming to Tanka. Tanka is very emotive haiku kind of a poetry. 5-7-5-7-7. That's a syllable count, but there are lots of emotions. So in my tears can the night wipe it away, for the day will come and they will not be there. And yeah, so that sort of. So they are very emotive. So this is not the real example, as I'm telling you, just like a very faint recall, but they are emotive. So Tanka helps you process whole lot of emotions when you want to write poetry. So again, 5 lines over there.
A funny story or something that you'd like to relate for our audience?
आई डोंट नो, जब एडिटर डांटता है तो फनी कुछ नहीं होता है, मतलब अच्छी डांट पड़ती थी. So when both Dipankar Mukherjee, who's a publisher, and Indrani Ganguly, who's the editor, both are younger to me. But yes, they are my mommy and daddy of publishing a book. So like my latest book with them had, the word count was about 87,000 words. Both of them, I think, needed to be hospitalized. The moment I sent the mail out to them, it is 87,000 words. Truncate how much? My truncate means like 20,000 words. Now,
From 80, oh my goodness,
yes,
okay.
20,000 words. Okay. And Surabhi, I knew that it was going to be an uphill task. It was like, like at that time was the first time even I cursed my kismat and karma both. As you asked. But yes, for them to say these things, even if sometimes they might sound harsh, always well intentioned. This is one thing, this is one point where I repose so much of faith in both Dipankar and Indrani, that if they're saying this, they mean it, and they mean it well for me as a writer. Because if I look at it today, it is 4 solid books, 4 printed books now. So the 4th will be coming out now, and 2 ebooks and 5 anthologies with the same publisher. So I'm sure we must have done something good together
To ensure that the word count is less, yet the soul of the story doesn't go. But of course, the editor knows what will sell and how well it will sell.
And even editor for that matter, if you see Indrani Mukherjee, she will come across this sugar, saccharine, sugar, sweetest human being, till she turns into the editor. Because then she's slaying you left, right, and center. Uske baad to Indrani is born with a red pen in her hand, and she goes like this, like this. But I trust her. That's a final word is I trust them.
Okay, you've written over a dozen anthologies. Some of them have been subject to the thesis of many research scholars, and ICSE, ELT series also. You've also edited several science journals and self-help books and biographies, right? How did all of this start?
I don't think so that after doing the Devi Sutras during that time, which was quite an energy drainer. I mean, first you have the Shrutis and the Smritis that you're trying to cull information from. Some of the stories you're unable to understand because they come across as very preposterous. So after having done one book, I did not have the stamina or even the mental width also to do another book. And he would not leave us alone. So he said, "Koi baat nahi, kahani de do." So we did those stories, and we were very happy with the outcome. And people are still reading those anthologies. That is how the anthology business actually started.
So you're also the co-owner of a corporate training firm called Disha. Can you please elaborate for our audience, the extensive workshops that you conduct under Disha? What exactly is Disha and क्या दिशा दिखाता है ये?
So Disha is a firm that I co-own, and Disha deals with the organization skills enhancements and the managerial competencies that there are. And we receive invites from PSUs, MNCs, corporate houses, universities, etc., from around the country. Disha has been very busy of late, so we've done lots of work with the DRDO's Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Corporate Affairs with IICA for IAPA and various other organizations.
What's the one leadership lesson you believe that every woman should embrace?
Leadership lesson that every woman should embrace. Surabhi, I first thing I really feel is please snatch your remote control from people who know just exactly which button to press. Yeah, so throw you off. So what happens is we teach people how to treat us. Whatever we bear more frequently will happen to us even more frequently. So I guess once you snatch that remote control, and it is very difficult task, it is not an easy task to stay stoically put with a straight face when something has hit you hard is is like a mountain to is like a Vindhya to climb almost. And but we learn through the hard lessons. So don't teach people how to treat you, let them know, teach them how not to treat you. So there's a book called The Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama and Dr. Howard C. Cutler, and in that, both of them, when they are fusing their Eastern and Western knowledge, and they are coming to one conclusion that most of the people who are out there to hurt others or demean others are coming from a very wrong place in their life, from a pool of dissatisfaction, anguish, and unhappiness. So once it has happened to me where somebody was doing it very, very frequently, and I went up to that person and I gave her a good big bear hug. And I told her, "तू इतनी परेशान क्यों है?" I said, "No, मैं तो नहीं हूँ." ऐसे फिर ऐसे क्यों हो? हाँ, हम मंकी नहीं हो और तुम मेरे मदारी नहीं हो. You can't make me dance. Right.
What's the one key element most people underestimate about executive presence?
Okay, let me first begin with what they underestimate about an executive presence coach.
Okay.
Everybody feels I'm a motivational speaker.
Okay.
Acha, so you're a motivational speaker. So I said, no, I haven't been able to motivate myself in life. How do I turn into a motivational speaker? And then the second thing that they come up with is that, you do one-on-one counseling or motivation to their 6-year-old child.
Okay.
So मेरे से अपने 2 बच्चे नहीं ठीक से पाले गए, वो बेचारे वैसे अच्छे बच्चे बन गए, बात अलग है.
कुछ तो अच्छा किया होगा आपने.
And the thing is that I'm not a psychoanalyst and I can't do these things. And when it comes to people, what is it they underestimate? They just feel that, iska isme kya hai, what you have to do. You can just pick up some slides from SlideShare, or have now even the chat GPT and the AI make slides, and all you need is a gift of gab and be a good orator and have a mastery over a skill, Hindi and English, and you'll be able to do very well. Well, it doesn't help. Even while you are conducting the training, sometimes the trajectory of your training completely deviates from how you had intended it to be, because you see what is working with your audience, what is not working with your audience. Sometimes even humor does not work. Everything is off the cuff, and to come off the cuff and to be in the situation, to be able to sponge like SpongeBob SquarePants the mood of the boardroom, is a very tough task. So it isn't one glove fits all, one size does.
And you have to keep upgrading every day, literally.
Every day.
Yeah.
So you learn about what what leader says, what a president of a country says today, what a warring country says today. You bring in those examples because they're live examples, and everybody read about those examples in the newspapers. So that works. And of course, empathy towards your audience. But yes, all those factors need to be taken in. Sometimes a senior is sitting, sometimes the juniors are also sitting there. What is it that you can say? Now, your slide says something about finding the weak link or about a weak leader. Now, when the principal or the HM is sitting over there, how do I talk about a weak leader? So, you need to sometimes, use those innuendos. You need to be very clever over there so that no sentiments are hurt. Everybody goes back wiser, and everybody must leave the hall in a happier state of mind that they come in, and take away something they didn't know earlier. This is something that people would not understand generally about executive presence, because I think there are, like they say now, we have more writers than we have readers, so we have more coaches than people who want to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So agree with you. If there was one skill you could master instantly, what would it be?
Okay, there is something that I really need to work on. I mean, I left it long time ago. Is I really want to go back to my singing, right? But one skill I want to master is, my God, everybody will be so amazed. I want to learn how to play the violin.
Okay.
और ये भूत मेरे को सवार हुआ था after I watched that movie Sur, which had Lucky Ali, which had beautiful music, and I want to learn how to play the violin. I hope so. I will be one day.
Wishing you all the very best. Okay. Okay. You are the recipient of the REX Karamveer Medal, the Uttarakhand Ratan, apart from so many other awards that you've got, right? From boardrooms to teaching workshops to book launches, and now with your new passion about learning the violin and singing and haiku and tanka, how do you balance your creative and your corporate personas?
I think time management is more important. Persona per se shifts according to the room that one is in, right? Because I call myself the chameleon, as much as I may hate them. I mean, I despise.
We all do, yeah, but
The geckos. But yes, I mean that shifts. But what is the challenge that generally I'm up against is time. I'm very disciplined in my approach. That is, I think, the only good thing I like about myself. I'm very methodical. I know what to do. I know if it needs to be done, yes, it needs to be done. And I guess that is how I'm able to balance. And another thing, Surabhi, I'm very mindful of what is not adding a value to my life. So, value may not be something in monetary terms or everything has to be a lucrative deal, but value even in terms of spending my time with a particular person. What is it that I took away? I mean, if I'm coming back with so much of negativity or something which was just out and out flippant, or something that made me feel diminished as a human being, then okay, fine. So once done, once learnt, and learnt for forever. So I will not invest my time or my energy in something like this. At the end of the day, it has to make me happy, it has to add some value to my life, and it should help me deliver better both as a coach as well as a writer.
But in today's world, if we talk about the younger generation, uh, the younger generation believes in logic, in inclusivity, in authenticity. They don't understand traditions and values as we had. So, how do you reach out to the younger generation and ensure that traditions are not just a burden but a bridge? So, how do you ensure that?
Well, it came with with the observation. I was in England and we were driving down. We were coming from somebody's house rather late or rather early in the morning. So it was about 3 a.m. And there was this huge serpentine queue emanating from W.H. Smith right till the next street. And then the same thing happened outside Waterstones. And I asked my friend who was there, I said, I don't know, huge serpentine queues, ये क्यों मेरे शहर में तो तब लगते हैं जब फ्री मठरी और लड्डू बिकते हैं, लेकिन यहाँ पर ये क्यों लगा है? He said the next Harry Potter book is due to come out.
Oh, just imagine.
So these people queue up, right, in the frosty days of winter, or even would do the same in the dog days of summer. And because the moment the bookstore opens, they would just have about as many copies, and everybody wants to procure their copy. And that it made me realize it's not as if the younger generation does not read, and most of them were young people. It's just that we need to be mindful of what they want to read. So, हमारी जो संस्कृति है वो प्राचीन है, वो जर्जर नहीं है. It is ancient, but it is not obsolete. So we also have stories like Harry Potter, the trees talking, the roots coming out and screaming at you, and the saucers flying, and all those things. Harry Potter series are brilliant books, no two ways about it. But it's not as if the Indian culture is devoid of these stories. So why are we always at the behest of a foreigner coming and telling us about our culture and our stories? Instead of sounding just interesting, I wanted them interested in the stories. And how do I do that? So I added those twists where I started understanding the mindset of my characters. When I was talking about the Mahabharata and somebody came and asked me, so Draupadi and 5 husbands, and the 5 husbands actually fighting with 100 cousins and still winning. How does that make sense? So you give them an analogy. You make the metaphorical references like this. Imagine Draupadi to be the human body. Imagine that a human body are married to the 5 senses. Every human body has 5 senses. Imagine the body to be married to the 5 senses, who are the 5 Pandavas. Now imagine the 100 Kauravas to be the tendencies that the human body has, both good as well as bad. Not all Kauravas were evil, right? They were evil. Now, if the 5 senses feel that they can gamble with the tendencies and win, then that is foolishness. They cannot do that. But the 100 tendencies, when it came to the war, they all need to be exterminated, because at that time the senses cannot differentiate between the good and the bad. They have to be terminated, because any tendency which at this moment is good can turn evil at any given time. So the senses have to defeat the tendencies to win the war, which they did. So your life is the battle between the senses and the tendencies, and the world that we live in is the Kurukshetra. Now think about it. When they think about it, it starts making sense to them. Second thing is, when you're writing about Yudhishthir, tell me, Surabhi, how would you feel about a man who's a very virtuous, truthful man, but is a co-husband with his brothers? And all these brothers are more adventurous, more brave, even at given times more good looking than him. What do you think Yudhishthir must be feeling? So how can you write about Yudhishthir as a virtuous man or the eldest Pandava brother only? You can't. He must be suffering from some kind of imposter syndrome that there is. And everybody knows that when it came to Draupadi, she loved Arjun the most and despised Yudhishthira the most. So you tell them about the Brahmastras. They talk about technology, they talk about making reels. So why can't you tell them about the Sanjay's Drishti? So all those things are there. Of the astronomical dating of the Ram Setu has taken place. So tell them about them. Tell them why they are seeing parrots at Shuktal. Right? The stories out there in the Puranas. You tell them about the Somnath temple. Right? The stories out there in the Puranas. So when they see those physical evidences, and when the storyteller also gives them, exposes another aspect of the protagonist's life, even if they're the gods and the goddesses, it becomes very relatable and they believe in it. Talking about so many demons, we're talking about Transformers for that matter. Yeah, Mahishasur, Mayavi, my transformer, right? So all those things. So usko to relate thoda sa karna padta hai. Just that is all that is needed.
They say that there are 9 rasas, okay, or sentiments in our Indian scriptures, right? And our performing arts use it extensively. They represent the spectrum of human emotions.
Right.
Yeah. I'll name them one by one, and I want you to associate uh, an Indian or an international mythological figure that goes with the sentiment.
Okay.
Okay. And also a parallel Bollywood, Hollywood, Tollywood, any personality that kind of maybe, emotes the same. So the 9 rasas, here we go. The first is Shringar, which is basically the love or the beauty, the how you dress up. And,
Damayanti.
okay.
So Damayanti was a very, very beautiful princess and she had a mind of her own. So she was the one who basically was able to identify Nala just on the basis of her knowledge and her education and her farsightedness from amongst the demigods. So I think Damayanti, and I would like Kriti Sanon to play that part.
Okay. All right. That is actually very, very well connected. Okay.
Yeah.
The second rasa is hasya, or laughter.
Okay. Laughter from Narad Muni, because sometimes he would come up with those such preposterous, comments and make people laugh. And he knew, when to make people laugh and when not. And I would like Pankaj Tripathi to play that part.
I think perfect. Yeah. Okay. All right. Karuna, or sorrow.
Maybe Kaushalya.
Okay. Yes.
Kaushalya, Ram's mother. She was helpless, right? And who would I want to prepare to? I think Balraj Sahni. I loved him.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, do biga zameen.
Rodra, or anger.
Agni Dev.
Okay.
And I
is okay. All right. Okay. Give it.
Agni Dev also portrays his anger in so many scriptures, right? Agni Dev is there, and I want Amitabh Bachchan to play that part.
Ooh. Okay. Wow. All right. Okay. Okay. Veer, courage, heroism.
Abhimanyu.
Okay.
Abhimanyu, and I would want Vicky Kaushal to play.
Oh, okay. Yes, lovely. All right. Okay. Bhayanak, which is fear or terror. More of terror, I would say.
Mahishasur, right? And the only terror that really comes to my mind is Anthony Hopkins in The Silence of the Lambs.
Okay. All right.
Nobody does it better than
Nobody can. True.
Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Bibasta. Bibasta, disgust. Yeah.
Disgust. Disgust is, I don't know, I'm not able to associate. Well, if you go by, okay, let's take it Dushasan for that matter, right? Who egged on his brother. And over there, I would have the actor who played the Joker and the Phoenix guy, the one who plays the Joker. I think he does
Okay.
it very well.
Yeah, he is actually, yeah. Oh my
Yes.
God. Okay. All right. Give it. Okay. Adbud, wonder, surprise.
Shikhandi or Shikhandini, that is, comes as surprise. And over here, I think Ayushman Khurrana.
All right. Okay. All right. And the last one is Shant, peace, tranquility.
Buddha. I think Gautam Buddha. And over here, Ranbir Kapoor. He's so dopey-eyed. And I mean, like his face does emanate peace. So I guess
That is true. That is so true. Yeah.
that is there. Or even Aishwarya, for that matter, her face is peaceful, for that matter.
Your favorite place in India to escape and recharge?
I think anywhere in the hills, right? When it is drizzling outside, is lovely. Anywhere in the hills. I mean, where would I say? I have loved to go to Wellington, DSC Wellington in Coimbatore, and then Landore, ITM DRDO, where I go to. It is so beautiful to take a walk in the evenings and go over there. The entire ambience is recharging and very inspiring. So I've always loved going to these places. And outside, of course, there's nothing beats Switzerland and the English countryside. Nothing can beat it.
Okay, so the depth and range of your work, from anthologies that shape academic research to your contributions to the ICSE ELT series and global literature journals to your novels, they all speak volumes about the impact across generations. They are testaments to life lived with purpose, with passion, with grit, and with grace. It's been a huge privilege to be here and and this holy city of Haridwar, sitting here in your humble abode and doing this podcast with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Surabhi. I think the underlying thought while writing all my books or while speaking to people has always been कि कुछ बात अपनी यूं कह सकूं कि उपहास जग का सह सकूं. There will always be naysayers. There will always be people who will choose to disagree with you. And their disagreement also might be very valid. There could be things that we need to work on and think. And I always humbly look forward to their people's feedback to understand where I'm going wrong and also enjoy these moments of adulation that I have when a person like you comes to my place to feature me in their very celebrated podcast. And I know the kind of people that you have featured, and I still have a huge ground to cover. But at least this bodes well and augurs well for the fact that I'm walking on the right road. Thank you very, very much for coming over here and speaking to me. And while we are speaking to others, we are also discovering parts of ourselves as we do. So thank you very much. I hope we get to speak again sometime. And in the journey, we would have learned a few more nuggets of wisdom.
Absolutely. I am totally enlightened and I mean it. I'm not just saying it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being on this show. There's a small memento that I'd like to present to you. Just thought
This
talking
is-
about mythology and, as the owl plays
wow.
a very major role. So I just thought that
And he's a wise owl.
wise owl, yes.
He's a wise owl. So I think the best thing for a writer is to get a wise owl. Thank you so much. And
you.
where did you click this photograph?
So this is in Bharatpur.
Oh,
Yes.
in the sanctuary?
Yes.
Oh,
This
boy.
is just outside the sanctuary.
Okay.
Yeah. So
This is so beautiful.
Thank
And the
you so
wise
much.
owl, which is like so right. I think we could borrow some wisdom from it. And I know exactly where this is going.
thank
This
you
is
so
going
much.
in this room,
Oh,
right
wow.
there.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Surabhi.
Thank you.
This is precious. This is invaluable.